down the end. Okay, this is your opportunity to fire questions at each or all of the speakers. Whoever thinks it's relevant for them to answer, they will answer. The floor is yours, ladies and gentlemen. It's wide up.
I think I wired up, yeah. Yeah, I don't think it would be like PPI, because PPI was more an ethical type of thing. But it's I just put that as like an accidental damages and that kind of thing. Because the legislation doesn't say to an individual who can claim, but they can claim, and obviously not everyone have got the law background. So these, in my own opinion, when I see that, I say, how will they do it? So obviously then there is a whole market out there who is doing these accidental claims for all sorts of things. Then why not to use that as a, opportunity and go for that and allow that subject access to no win, no fees, and get something for them. That's
my personal view on all of this is that soon as Joe Public gets to hear that they can claim, there'll be bunches of lawyers touting their services, cold calls, just as we had with PPI. Bet the bottom dollar. Yep. Next question. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Good question.
The point I just wanted to make was that the irony, of course, is that those sort of PPI firms are probably some of the worst practitioners of data protection out there. So how that would quite work with them trying to pursue claims for other people being in breach would make some interesting case law, I think.
In the middle. Hang on, Mike's coming.
It's unfortunately going to be one of those things that's going to be difficult for small organisations to cope with, and it kind of favours the big guys who can afford to spend a lot of money on the projects and the implementation. Do you guys have any advice for the smaller companies which potentially have a rat's nest of data that they can't necessarily get their head around?
Hi, hope you can all hear that. Oh, I can even hear myself. This is amazing. Well, the real issue here is that all companies are going to have to deal with it in some way, shape, or form. And a smaller company perhaps might have a slightly better handle on the information that they hold now, certainly if they're a newer organisation. So that might play to a little bit of a strength for them. But they really do need to look at, some controls that are going to help them in there. Whatever way it is, if they have laptops, they're still going to need to encrypt them. They still need to understand their data and do some data privacy. I think for those guys, they probably need to try to get up to speed themselves more directly than using consulting to help them. If they could train two of their people to help to do that, that's going to ease the burden. And then they're still going to need to look at some controls around it, but possibly some self-fulfillment there over the steps to be done, and maybe just a little bit of consulting at the end to, just to make sure that they got that right is probably the approach they need to take. My wife does run a small company, and obviously I'm helping to do that, but I'm going to talk to these guys in a minute. Only kidding. But she does run a small company, and we have that problem, how does she do it and what controls are there? But it is possible to do, but it definitely is more about doing it yourself. I hope that helps.
Next. Down the front here. I've got yours at the back. Next.
Okay. A lot of you have spoken about machine learning today. The question I have is, do you think that this ought to be a covert type of activity, or do you feel that you should take the big stick approach and say, look, we're all going to be doing this now, we're going to be looking at what you're doing?
So the question was about machine learning and whether machine learning should be done covertly or tools such that used covertly by employers or whomever to monitor employee activity. I've seen both approaches. So some of our customers are quite overt about it because they see products such as the ZoneFox product and other products provide a positive influence on people's behavior. You know, if people know that that's there, then they will change their behavior. I've seen it used covertly as well. And I've seen the result of breaches being detected by covert tools. And as soon as it happens, once people realize there's something out there, you know, monitoring their behavior, I don't think there's any perfect answer. I think it depends on the type of organization, the type of data at risk, for example. For me, you know, some organizations, if we go back several years, used to be very overt about the sort of web filtering that they used to do, for example, and some less so. And I don't think it's fundamentally that different. It depends how mature and understanding, you know, an employee force you have. And employers need to make that decision. As long as, ultimately, there is something in contracts that says, we will monitor your use of our company material, our company systems, so that if they try to use it in the future, we don't get what we had recently in, was it Bulgaria or Romania, where someone's personal messages were used in a court case, and it was thrown out of court because there was no clear, nothing in their contract say that messages could be monitored. So we need to be open as employers with our employees about what we're doing. Maybe not down to the detail of exactly the tools we're using, but also, you know, reassure them that it protects them. So if their account is compromised, that it could help, you know, prove it wasn't them, for example.
And this requires the board, with its responsibilities, to make sure every member of staff has clear understanding of corporate policy when it comes to GDPR. It's not something that can be taken for granted. There was a person at the back there, and I've got you at the front next.
A question for Jason, if I may. Just interested in your data mapping exercise. Just wondering if you could elaborate how you exactly went about that. Did you use a tool? What sort of challenges you faced?
Yeah, sure. So we've done a couple of things, really. So part of it was a manual investigation. We've got data stewards, and they are doing a huge amount of work of categorising all our data and all our assets and going through and prioritising those, and then putting them into, are they personal information, are they secret information. We've also got a tooling called Qualiware. I don't get any kickbacks from Qualiware, they're not here, are they? To help us actually use that and map out where our data is and what's going. So we've done some of it as a manual process, and we had 3 or 4 stewards going through all of our assets, looking at everything, and then we're using tools to sort of back that up and then layer it on top of that to make sure that we're capturing everything, because the data stewards only know what they know, and they're talking to the rest of our colleagues in the business, whereas the tool hopefully will identify any of those unknown areas.
Have the speaker mic here, please. The gentleman on the end. The man in the white shirt.
Reference has been made to this being the new health and safety. So as health and safety is a good thing, what's your view on the new health and safety executive inspector that's going to come out and do your walk around and kick the tyres of why you've had an accident, what they're going to do, and how is that going to grow as a person that's required? Because I can see the army of them required, and where is the guidance? And finally, with how do you grow them? How do you make the ideal person that's going to give everyone all this GDPR guidance for organisations?
Daniel, thank you.
I don't know anything about the health and safety inspector. I quite like the analogy because in many ways I think health and safety is an example of something which at one time was probably perceived as an unnecessary, but a burden for an organisation to do. And actually I think it's a good example of where culture change has really taken place. And I think actually now, it's just accepted as part and parcel of how we do things. And you have, hopefully on the whole, you have organisations where, if someone sees something on the floor, they don't think, oh, that's someone else's job to pick it up. They just pick it up because everyone recognises they have a part to play. So from that perspective, I would hope that data protection and GDPR and privacy could follow in health and safety sort of in wake. In terms of, as I said, I don't know about this particular role you're talking about, but I'm guessing that a group DPO type function could be along those lines. And undoubtedly, there is going to be a challenge for organisations. You hear the figures about the numbers of DPOs that are going to be needed across Europe, and I think there's the 28,000 is the figure that sometimes gets cited. As someone who's been out there in the contracting market over the last sort of 10 months, I know it's very buoyant at the moment. Even when you get a role, you're constantly getting calls, and if you explain that you're doing something, the recruiter sign off is usually, do you know someone else who's available? So there is clearly a lot of demand. But again, to some extent, I'm guessing that's quite a temporal thing, and there's just a lot of pressure at the moment. Over time, one would expect that the publicity and the market forces might drive more people to sort of seek out these roles when they see that there is a function that can be delivered. And in terms of the skills, I guess it's what you want is people who kind of have a good understanding of the regulations. I personally think it's really important that people are very pragmatic, very business focused. It's not just about, you don't need, or businesses don't want someone who just comes in and lays down the law. You need someone who understands how it applies to their business, how it enables their business, because that's what its role is really about. It's about enabling business to do the things it wants and needs to do, but to do so in a compliant way. So the function is not to be saying no, it's to be saying yes, however. So as I said, I think it's just those sorts of characteristics, those sorts of skills, that sort of approach. And yeah, it's not, there isn't going to be an immediate pool of people that can be available to do that, but one would hope over time that that's the direction we'll go in.
I think a relevant point that Daniel made there was the enabler. That security has to be an enabler. It doesn't have to be a blockage, a fortress wall. It has to meet the needs of your business. In the middle there. We'll take this as the last question, because we're nearly...
Thank you. We keep on hearing that the criminal organizations are actually merging their resources, pooling their resources to launch the attacks. Don't you think it's the time that we all, the companies like yours, get together and develop that sort of a tools, basically, which you can provide to the companies, organizations, which can identify the weak areas, and then whichever companies specialize in that area, they can help them out? Don't you think it's the time for that?
Guessing that's mine then.
Yes.
So if I put the tooling aside, I can tell you all that the larger players in the security industry all have information sharing partnerships. We share information every single day about threats that we see. And I think to join that club, you need to be contributing. Actually, it's a fairly low bar. It's about 100,000 a day, but from our perspective, we're probably detecting. Some days it's 3 million, but most of the players in there, and I don't need to name them for this audience, do contribute at that level. So we're helping to bolster it. The things that really set people aside, is how they develop the tools and the things that those tools can do, and how those tools integrate with each other. And we talked earlier about automation and orchestration. So at that threat level, there's absolutely sharing. And it's down to each of those individual companies to make the most of that information, and to develop the appropriate tooling or to drive it into their existing tools for that level of protection. Does that help?
Can I just add something here? Sorry, can I just add? I think it's a good question because if we look at the audience today and we look at GDPR, we are trying to have a traction for personal data security and all that. And I think commercial off-the-shelf products, I think there's a time coming up to have some kind of a legislation or law come out, like a liability law. Something like that to make at least the known vulnerabilities plugged in before it goes out in production and before it goes out in sale. I mean, there are maturity models, CMMA, all types of security maturity model, but often we see that there's still a lot of holes left in the commercial off-the-shelf product. So I think if there is a kind of a law, something like that, it might force them to plug their own vulnerabilities.
Well,
That's just an opinion.
This is where the NCSC comes in and their schemes for accrediting products. And I'm sure as GDPR moves on and the need for assured products to protect, then their role will become ever increasing and we'll get proper evaluated and certified products. Right.
Can I just have one more comment?
You may.
Thank you. Yeah, be interesting to see over time. You know, you go to a supermarket and you pick up a product and it says, you know, it's got this much salt and it's got this much fat, it's got these kind of things. Is, you know, when we start to see labelling like that on products that relate directly back to cyber. And I think some of the first places we might actually see that is in the automotive industry, because it isn't going to be the prettiest car that wins that race, it's going to be the safest one.
Sorry, just very quickly,
Yeah.
adding on to that as well, it's not about what you know, it's what you don't know. It's the zero-day attacks you should be looking, you know, you want to be protected against. It's all good as sharing information about known threats, known this, known that. Chances are everyone already knows about that anyway. It's the ones you don't know about. It's cutting the knees away from these attackers, being able to do things, whether it's not, it's the reputation, it could be the advanced machine learning, it could be the heuristics, it could be, that's where you want to be spending a lot of time as well. The stuff that everyone knows about, chances are it's not going to be coming in that way.
Absolutely. So I'm going to draw this session to a close. It's exactly 16:30. We've made the day on time. I'm grateful to everybody. It's my privilege and pleasure to draw the conference to a close. I read the Daily Telegraph this morning, and on the comment page it says, "Big data is the black gold of today. It's time for politicians to catch up, and we need a bill of digital rights." Is that going to be a conference topic in the future? Actually, there's not one mention of GDPR in that comment. Very sad. Right, I've chaired this conference for the last 8 or 9 years on behalf of IAMM, and they've been great conferences. And I was sat at home yesterday lunchtime wondering whether or not that I should make the effort to come today, because I'm under a fairly heavy chemotherapy regime at the moment. But I decided to come because it is a good conference, and I'm absolutely delighted that I made the effort, because today has been one of the best conferences I've chaired for IMM. The content, the speakers were brilliant, and I say that with great knowledge and experience. And so, on your behalf, I'd like to thank the speakers for their contribution to making this conference a great success. There's been a consistent thread all day, and there's been no discontinuities in what they've had to say. So thank you, speakers. Thank you, exhibitors, who have paid to be here to impart their knowledge and their experience and their products and capabilities. Grateful to them for coming along. There's one company you didn't see today, and that's Menlo. They gave the bag. They sponsored the bag. So thank you, Menlo, for that. I'd like to thank Manchester United Stadium staff for hosting us here today. Been a great venue, and I hope you've appreciated what's been there. To IMM staff, to Marcus Benson, Tim Dean, to Sonia, and all the boys and girls in IMM, thank you for putting this agenda together and for inviting me again to chair. To you, delegates, thank you for your patience, for your diligence, for your intellectual questions, but most of all, for staying the course to the end. And I've chaired a number of conferences when there's only been about 3 rows left at the end. So that tells me a very important message. You've enjoyed the conference and the content. Thank you. The next conference may be in January here, and the organisers are working on that. But there will be one in London in 2018. Either one, I hope to see you there, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, continuing to make UK the best place to do business electronically. Thank you very much for attending, and a safe journey home.